Hello, I'm Karl Wells, and this is Point to Point. My guest today is Iris Petten. For most of her life, she's been working in Newfoundland and Labrador's primary industry, an industry that brought people here hundreds of years ago, the fishery. She grew up in Hibbs Cove, Portagrave, was brought up by a fishing family. In fact, her family goes back in the fishery generations. Her father is a fisherman and boat builder. And it was being brought up in that family that really gave her her launch into working in the fishery herself, first for Fishery Products International, and later in her life, Ocean Choice International. And I'd like to welcome Iris Petten to the program.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Iris, talk about Hibbs Cove. You grew up in the 1970s. What are some of the highlights of your life growing up there?
Portagrave has always been a very unique community, and I guess the fishery have always played an important role in the community, as you've just indicated. But I think also it was to do with a lot of a work ethic and hard work. And growing up, we were expected to do lots of chores. So I learned very early in my life of growing up in that community and in that family that that was part of what you were about, why your existence.
What was a day like, for example, after school? You'd go to school, and what would happen after school?
My most vivid memories of after school is going to the twine store with my grandfather. And I would sit on...
You're going to have to explain what a twine store is.
Well, it's a gear shed. It's like a gear shed where they mended their twine in the winter. And after school, you'd go sit on a pile of rope or twine and help fill the needles. So it would be preparing the fishing gear for the next season.
I was going to say, there's a great, I think, it's that kind of store. The great Newfoundland artist, George Noseworthy, did a painting of a store in Hibbs Cove, did he not?
Yes, it was called the Twine Loft.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was only a young girl, maybe 9 or 10, when George Noseworthy came to Hibbs Cove, and I was probably one of his students of the art program.
Oh.
But of course, you know, I wasn't very good on the artist, but
It didn't take.
It was learn to mix a couple of colors that I remember, but I certainly have vivid memories of that.
Mm-hmm. Now, you come from a very, you know, as I said, a family that has gone back generations in the fishery. Your dad was not only a fisherman, but a boat builder. Tell me, his name was Vernon.
Yes.
Your mom's name, Shirley?
Yes.
Tell me about Vernon and Shirley.
Well, I have 2 brothers and 3 sisters, and we're very much influenced by our parents. They were very loving and caring family. Portagrave was also a very much community-minded and church-going community. So we were very much raised that way, and was really important to be kind to people, and it was really important to feel a sense of community, of helping out when somebody was in need. Mm.
Your father actually had some sort of position with the church for many years, because I saw something about him being honored not too long ago by the church, right?
Yes, a few years ago, Dad was honored for serving as 50 years of treasurer of the Pentecostal Church in Portagrave.
Wonderful.
And he spent his whole life within the church and volunteering, and he's still volunteering out there.
Oh, great. How old is he now?
Dad is 83,
Excellent.
and my mom is 82, and
Wonderful.
so I spend a lot of time with them still every weekend when I'm out there.
Yeah. Now, you were the eldest daughter. Were you kind of looked up to as a role model by your younger siblings?
Well, I have a brother that was born when I was in high school, so he don't even remember me living at home in a sense, but it was part of having the responsibility. I guess I was no different than many Outport, Newfoundland communities where it was a responsibility to help with the raising. But it was also when my mom was pregnant with my other siblings, I had to take the turn of helping, you know, with the chores of cutting and gutting the fish as well. and helping out, you know, what needed to be done. So I was part of, and my mom, her mother died when at a very young age. So she felt that, you know, she had to raise her children, and especially her eldest daughter, the way that she had been raised, you know, as part of what she had been accustomed to.
I was just wondering, your father was a fairly prominent man in the community. He was a fisherman, a boat builder. His brother, Lester Petten, fisherman as well, and a lot of people will probably remember Lester from the CBC Fisheries broadcast, where he was a fixture for many, many years, and a very recognizable voice. Your grandfather, you mentioned, was in the fishery. A great history, great tradition. That must have made something of an impression on you when you were a young girl, did it not?
Absolutely. A lot of people I still meet today, the first question is, are you related to Lester Petten? Because he was so well known. But you know, even back in those days, for me, as the daughter growing up instead of the son, I was very much wondered, even back in those days, that why I couldn't, you know, own my own enterprise, or why I couldn't do some of the things that, you know, I could see the rest of my family being involved in with fishing, you know, boats and licenses. So, and seeing the progress, and they were always forward thinkers, and I guess ahead of the curve in whatever fishery that they looked at. So I was always thinking about that.
And of course, Port de Grave has always been a very, very successful fishing community. To this day, it's a very successful fishing community. A lot of people have gotten to know it, of course, because of the Christmas lights, where they put the lights on all the ships and vessels. But I'm just wondering, what is the formula? Why Port de Grave? Why has it been so successful?
I really believe it has to do with work ethic. Growing up, you weren't defined by what you look like, what education, but you were defined by your work ethic. And I think because of that work ethic and the attitude of being successful and the competition, I remember many times asking my grandfather that question. You know, there was like 3 big families of Pettens, and asked, you know, and I said to my grandfather, did you, how did you feel? Like, did you share your secrets? And he said, well, we didn't always tell them everything, so it was all about making sure that you maintain some of, what gave you that competitive edge. And I think that has been part of why they've had that success. And they've taken pride in the community, and with the boats, it's probably one of the most prosperous fishing communities in all of Newfoundland and Labrador.
I think I read somewhere where you said that your father was very creative in terms of figuring out ways to make money in business and to carve out a niche for himself. Well, what exactly did you mean by that?
Well, you were never wasteful. My dad is out there right now. He built a boat last year, not to float, but it was to go in my sister, Vern, and her husband operates the Goodyear's Pond Park. And so for the playground, they wanted a boat where the kids could go and actually sit on board and have a picnic. And right now he's building a train that's going up there. So it was all about using, pieces of wood, how we could look at other people of it, spreading the message of your heritage, of the background, and it was just finding ways that you could still promote ways of earning money, of how you could do things differently, whether it was to make sure that you were always mindful of whatever resources that was around.
Great. Is it true that when you were a young girl, you would spend your summers cutting and gutting fish on the wharf that your father would catch?
Well, in my earlier days, as I mentioned, when Mom was pregnant with my other siblings, we were still expected to do the work. And I was probably only around maybe 10 or so. And I had to get down, and yes, I did my share of cutting. And after school, spreading the fish on the flake when there was a salt fishery that was on the go at the time. And expecting to cook meals for the family, it was just a given. And I just did it, and don't think twice even now today, even about helping out or cooking or doing what needs to be done. It just comes natural.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, are there any other chores that you had to do which were part of the family business, apart from the splitting fish?
Yeah, it was always lots of chores around.
Yeah. So what kind of fish did your dad catch? It was cod, I assume.
Well, you know, in Newfoundland, every time we relate to fish, it's automatically cod.
Yeah, that's right. Fish means cod.
Fish means cod. But it was other fisheries. I remember as a young girl going out to the salmon nets, you know, in the evenings, and also going around door to door selling them, because we just wasn't enough a market, you know, to try and, you know, sell the price. So we would go around door to door. And when people come to my door now, I can't say no, because I remember what it felt like, you know, being on the other side of trying to get someone to buy something, and the sign of a good salesperson is closing that deal.
There's not much wild salmon on the go these days.
No, but I remember doing lots of that as well.
Yeah. So your father and you and, you know, your other siblings, they no doubt felt that the male offspring would follow the father into the fishery, or they wouldn't be surprised if that happened. Your father had followed his father. But you had a little secret. In the back of your mind, you were thinking, I'd like to get into the fish business. I'd like to have a vessel and a license. What made you think? Like, what was it that turned you to that way of thinking when you were younger?
Well, I could see the opportunities, but after I finished school, I was later starting university. I worked in a doctor's office for about 5 years before I started as into going to university, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do, but I just knew I needed to have an education, to chance to get an opportunity to meet new people. And to look at, you know, I could develop businesses and look at the opportunities. So, and thought, you know, maybe this is not life, you know, in a small community. I needed to move to town. But I wasn't in there very long when I realized that a lot of the opportunities was back home and in my own life and in fisheries. And even though I wanted, you know, to own my own license, traditionally that had been the way and has been part of our culture and the way it used to be. But that have changed now, thank goodness for that. But and my sister actually is as a crew member on with her husband. She's outside 200-mile limit, you know, fishing crab, which I'm very proud of her. It was part of my dream as well. But was finding out later that once I realized the opportunities was back home and in the fishery, that I could look at, you know, developing some things. And when I realized how the system was working, and now I could get monies from the bank, and now I could help and get involved. And my brothers and all of my family, my siblings, have all been very successful in their own right.
And I'm sure they've been, including your parents, have been quite supportive of you and what you've been doing.
Like they were supportive of all of us. You know, when I'm back home, I'm still a daughter, I'm Iris, and that's, you know, what's important for me as well. I can be myself and who I am, and that's exactly what it is, and I never ever want to be any different than that.
So eventually, I know you said you worked in an office. Eventually you decided, I'm going to give university a go. What did you want to study when you started university?
I thought that I might like business, but I realized that I had been at a school for 5 years. Sometimes you forget the basics. You know, the math, even though it came fine to me when I was in high school, but once you'd been out, you forgot some of the basic things. So it was a little challenging for me going in as a mature student, and I started in like a January semester, the winter semester, which was, you know, kind of out of the mainstream. So it was a little bit challenging, but I wasn't quite sure.
How old were you, by the way, when you started?
I was 21, I believe it was, when I started university.
Now, at some point, you took an economics course from a guy who really helped put your your life in focus, or your career plan in focus for you. Is that true?
He was a professor at the university. He was originally from Poland, and he was a fisheries was a fisheries geography course. And I was probably one of the few females in the class at the time, so I guess I kind of stood out in the class, and I was very inquisitive and understanding. And he, of course, he frequently asked me questions around the fishery, and of course I felt very comfortable in that world of being able to answer them. So I think he made me realize, you know, well, maybe there are some things I could be doing.
Yeah, I've got some life experience with this that I can put to good use.
Yes.
Yeah. So you spent how many years at university?
Well, I did an undergraduate degree, and then I also went back and did a second undergraduate degree as in education to realizing that I was dealing with a lot of fishermen in my work world who needed help with, you know, buying licenses, and I was helping them with business proposals.
Yeah.
And some of them couldn't read or write, you know, when I could understand that and appreciate that, and being able to help them navigate through understanding how they needed to set up their business proposals and get their financing in place.
Yeah. When you were at university, you mentioned mathematics, and that was a challenge. There's a neat little story I remember you told me once about your mom. You phoned your mom and said, "I'm really having a tough time with this math, and I don't know what I'm going to do," or whatever. She said something to you. I don't think it had the effect she was looking for. It had the opposite effect, but just talk about that.
She probably knew me better than I knew myself, but I remember at the time I was so disappointed. It was my first Math 1010 exam, and when I got it back, I had like 45. I was devastated, because I felt like I can do better than this. It was really a big deal for me, and it was so discouraged, so I was looking for support. So I called home and I said to Mom, you know, I just had this test back and I didn't, well, she said, well, what are you in there for? If we wanted you to go, you wouldn't be going. So just give it up and come on home. Don't be so silly. You know, give it up. You don't need that. You gave up your lovely job. You have a nice car. Just come on home and forget about the university. And I thought to myself, well, I'm going to show her. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to make sure that I'm going to get through this, and I'll get some support, whatever I need. And you know, I never ever shared with her after that. When she don't know if I had all A's, B's, C's, or D's. She just knew that if I got something in my mind and I got focused, I was going to do it. And I dreamt of the day when I was going to walk across the stage. That became a real goal and a real focus for me.
And you did.
And I'm so glad I didn't listen to her.
Yeah.
I keep reminding her.
And it wasn't long after you'd walked across that stage that you went to work for FPI, Fishery Products International.
Yes.
And had a good 10-year career there. What was your position there, and talk about how you progressed over the 10 years.
Well, I started working, I went there as a summer student, and they realized that, you know, I had a work ethic, and so it was a position that was coming up in the trawler department, and of course that was in the mid-'80s. And it was 60-odd trawlers at the time, is when the FPI had just amalgamated from the Fishery Products, the Lake Group, the Penny Group, into Fishery Products International. And I really enjoyed my time because I've got to know all of the captains, the mates and engineers, and I got involved in doing some training programs. We also did some fleet analysis. So we would look at class of vessels to know if it should have been the same amount of cost with regard to maintenance and what they should have been catching of cost per pound for each pound of cod that was caught. So was looking at a lot of that analysis. So it was a very good career, but then of course '92 came along and the cod moratorium, and I was one of the people that was laid off in the system.
But you weren't down for very long, because it wasn't too long afterward that you got together with a group of fishermen and you formed a fishers co-op. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I was still had that idea in my head about, you know, fishery was still my background and knew a lot about it. I was probably one of the few people who understood at the time the inshore fishery, as well as, you know, understanding what it was offshore as well. So I did meet a number of large, 65, in the larger inshore fleet, because that was the life I knew from Portagrave and with my brother and a number of them. So we formed an organization called Grand Atlantic Seafoods, and it was about how we could sell as a group to get a better price, as well as the efficiencies with economies of scale on buying in bulk, whether it was fuel or gear, whatever. But it was in about a year into that, we had an opportunity to put together a business proposal to look at getting on the processing side, which was very unusual for fishermen at that time, to look at doing a processing. So there was an opportunity came for St. Lawrence on the Bjorn Peninsula to have a crab processing license based on a regional basis. And I guess it kind of helped at the time that the Minister of Fisheries was from Portagrave with our Honourable John Efford, which everybody is known, Portagrave is known for as well. Right. So it was wonderful that we, in no time, we were successful in that bid. But it was tough, we needed a lot of money. And of course it had been just a few years since the cod moratorium, and the banks weren't very anxious to lend out money at that time, 4 or 5 years later. So every time you went to the bank looking for financing, do you realize what fishery, we're not putting any money in the fishery. So I went many places really believing in this dream. And that's when I got to meet my business partner at the time, which was Chess Penny. And he came in as a business partner, and I guess was a couple of $1 million initially, but that only became a drop in the bucket for all of the rest of the things that went there. But that was my my first foray into the processing side.
Yeah, and some people may not know this, but it was that company, Grand Atlantic Seafoods, that kind of evolved into Ocean Choice International.
Yeah, so,
was it not?
Yeah, so what happened after a couple of years and realizing there was more money that needed to go in, especially when the shrimp fishery came on and we needed money to get involved in shrimp processing and equipment. A lot of the inshore fishers who had been my business partners, was a big risk, and so they decided to come out. So their shares were bought out, and they did very well with that. And then we ended up where it was just the two of us, with Chess and myself as the business partners. And then we were also into a relationship ourselves, where we married later in 2000, and then in 2000, Martin and Blaine Sullivan came in as our business partners.
Excellent. And so towards the end of that time, what were you doing at Ocean Choice International? I assume you were on the board, or?
Yes, I was involved in a lot of the amalgamation and getting started. It was a lot of tough times because you needed a lot of financing and a lot of capital, to get involved in a number of fisheries. But things have worked out very well, and it was kind of ironic that in 2007 it was OCI that bought out the assets of Fishery Products International, where I had started from.
That's a bit ironic, yeah. You mentioned the challenges. I was going to say, where do you get the chutzpah? Where do you get the fortitude to carry on? Because there are an awful lot of ups and downs in business.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've earned my stripes.
I bet you have, yeah.
And there's been lots of challenges.
Yeah. And it's probably a little bit tougher for a woman, I would think.
Well,
back then maybe. Back
then and even now with any business, no matter, it's tough in business, period. Sometimes you have successes, but is realizing you don't take no for an answer. You continue with your work ethic, having the right attitude, surrounding yourself with good people. And I've been very fortunate in my life to have very good mentors. And I feel very fortunate that I, sat around many the business tables with Chess. I mean, he was an icon as a businessman in this province and beyond. And so, having that opportunity was a great opportunity for me, and it was taking advantage of all of those opportunities. Mm.
Now, we have to talk about MUN, because you have been the chair of the MUN Board of Regents for a couple of terms. Is there anything you'd like to share about that experience with us?
Well, it'll be 6 years, I guess. I've been there for 5 years. It will be 6 years when my term finishes. It has been an enjoyable experience. I've learned a lot through that, through that whole process. It has been challenging of looking at, the budgeting, because it's running the business of the university. My husband really wasn't interested in some of the things. He was more interested in money. It was a volunteer position for me. But it's been good. The university means a lot to this province, and it certainly has meant a lot to me to come from a rural Newfoundland and realize that education is key to our resiliency as a province, to be able to create more work and get people educated, and I think has played a big role, and I'm very fortunate to be able to give back in this way.
And you're hopeful for the future of the university?
Oh, definitely. I think that the university is, plays an instrumental role in this province.
You've also established a scholarship at the Marine Institute. Just tell us about that.
I did that many years ago. I had a very good friend who passed away at a young age, and so I did it in her memory. And I guess there's a lot of people that didn't even realize I was the person who was behind it. But I also wanted to encourage young people to continue with their education, so I set it up based on that encouragement. And I did it based on needs. So if it was someone who was struggling, who probably didn't have the finances from their parents, or they, get started to go to post-secondary, would be helping them to push themselves on a little bit further, to give them a hand up.
Good for you. Iris, it's been wonderful speaking with you. We could go on, but unfortunately we've run out of time. But I know that what you've had to say is going to be an inspiration for a lot of folks out there, especially a lot of young women who are watching. And thanks again.
Thank you.
Okay.
If you want convenience, Marie's Mini Mart is here.